She didn't flinch when those handcuffs went on. No badge, no explanation. Just a quiet woman at the shooting range who refused to identify herself. She was hitting impossible targets like it was nothing, and when local officers asked for ID, she simply shook her head. 20 minutes later, they led her away in cuffs. The next morning, everyone in that tiny coastal Maine courtroom expected a routine arraignment. But then the heavy doors swung open, and a Navy admiral in full-dress uniform strode down the center aisle. Veterans snapped to attention. The judge's face went pale as she read the sealed envelope. Suddenly, everything changed. But let's rewind to where this all began. Before the handcuffs, before the courtroom drama, before the Admiral showed up, dawn broke over a remote civilian shooting range on the rocky coast of Maine. A low fog clung to the steel targets, and early risers were already unpacking gear. Most shooters fit familiar profiles. Hunters zeroing in for season, competitive marksmen with custom rigs, weekend tactical enthusiasts. Then there was her. She walked in plain jeans and a gray jacket, baseball cap low over her eyes. She carried a long case, maybe a tripod, maybe a camera, nothing that screamed military. She settled at the farthest lane, methodically unpacking what turned out to be a sleek, unmarked rifle. No high-end scope, no spotting aids, just her steady hands and practice routine. Frank Holden, range safety officer, retired cop, ex-Navy, watched her from his little glass booth. 22 years in the Navy plus 10, running this place gave him instincts about people. He'd never seen anyone like her. Her first shots drilled perfect center mass groups. Then, with zero adjustments, she picked off targets at distances most shooters wouldn't dare attempt. Frank's coffee went cold as he watched her inhale on a 4-count, hold, squeeze, and exhale, each shot landing exactly where she aimed. Wind be damned. She felt the breeze, maybe heard it, and compensated instantly. One nervous, regular nudged Frank's shoulder. "Who is she?" he whispered. "How is that even possible?" 20 minutes later, 2 local officers arrived. They approached cautiously, hands hovering near holsters. "Ma'am, you need to show ID and your firearm permit," the senior cop said. She turned, calm as a fog outside. "Is there a problem, officer?" "ID and permit, please." She slipped her hands into view. "I don't have them." A quick search. No wallet, no phone, just a blank key card and a small notebook filled with coordinates. No argument, no panic. When they slapped cuffs on her, she only flashed a quick glance at the tree line, the distant road, the mountains beyond, as if calculating angles no one else could see. In the sheriff's office, she sat for processing. No name, no address, no story, just her unflappable silence. Booking officers tried friendly chatter, then veiled threats of federal charges. Nothing. When left alone, she surveyed her cell like a field operative, marking camera spots, timing guard shifts, mapping emergency exits. They ran her name through every database, local, state, national, even federal. Nothing. Systems crashed. They'd try again tomorrow. Late afternoon, a rookie slid her a cup of water. As she lifted the cup, her sleeve crept up, revealing a faint, precise scar on her wrist, the kind you get rappelling from helicopters. "Nice scar," the officer said. She met his gaze for the first time. "Rock climbing accident," she replied. Around 4 p.m., her public defender arrived, rushed, overworked, visibly annoyed. After 20 minutes with a mute client, he sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he muttered. "They're talking terrorism now. Your weapon's unregistered." She said nothing. That night, she barely slept. Detective Marcus Wells noticed her posture. Honest criminal slouch. Scared suspects tremble. She sat still as a statue, her eyes calculating room geometry. Morning arrived faster than expected. Deputies loaded her into the courthouse van. Outside, the harbor glinted in sunrise light, a naval vessel anchored just beyond sight. As they drove off, the faintest look passed over her face. Recognition, maybe relief. The coastal harbor courthouse was built in 1887, with wood benches and ornate railings carved in a simpler era. Today, the gallery overflowed. Curious locals, Portland reporters and men in dark suits scattered like chess pieces. Judge Eleanor Harmon flipped through her docket, eyebrows low. The public defender stood. "Your Honor, we request a continuance. My client remains uncooperative, and I've had no time to prepare." Before Judge Harmon could respond, the big oak doors slammed open. A Navy admiral entered, metals glinting under fluorescent lights. He walked straight to the bench, ignoring protocol. Veterans in the room snapped to silent attention. Even the judge stiffened. The admiral handed sealed orders to the bailiff. The judge opened them. Her face shifted from annoyance to shock to solemn acceptance. After a pregnant pause, she rapped her gavel. "All charges against the defendant are dismissed, effective immediately. This matter is classified." Pandemonium erupted. The admiral strode down to the defense table. The bailiff snapped her cuffs off. For the first time, the woman spoke. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience." The admiral offered a gentle smile. "On the contrary, Commander, the Navy apologizes to you." Every uniformed person there, from the two bailiffs to the agents, switched to perfect attention. At the word, "Commander," she straightened, no longer trying to blend in. Her posture transformed into that of a decorated officer. Every inch from her shoulders to her head radiated authority. Judge Harmon, herself a former JAG, rose and saluted before realizing it. She quickly recovered with a respectful nod. Outside, reporters clamored for a statement, but Commander Hayes declined. "Privacy," she said. She slipped into civilian clothes provided by the Navy, then climbed into a black government SUV. A local VFW veteran approached. "Excuse me, ma'am, I was in Desert Storm. I saw you in that court." He extended his hand. She shook it firmly. "Thank you for your service," he said. "Thank you for yours," she replied. The admiral checked his watch. "Commander Hayes, we should proceed. Operation Silent Harbor requires debriefing in Washington." "Some of us are always around," she whispered to Frank, who'd slipped in unnoticed. Then she was gone, leaving behind a small-town courtroom buzzing like a hornet's nest. And that's how a quiet woman at a shooting range in Maine, who refused to show ID, turned out to be Commander Alexandra Hayes, one of the Navy's top special operators, operating under deep cover for months. If this story grabbed you, hit subscribe. We got more untold tales of people who serve in the shadows, doing extraordinary things without ever seeking the spotlight. Detective Wells blinked as the courthouse doors slammed behind them. One moment, he was escorting a mystery suspect. The next, he was standing in the wake of naval honors and classified orders. As the black government SUV slipped away, he realized his world had just shifted. Back at his desk in the Coastal Harbor Police Department, Wells stared at the thin envelope bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. Inside was an invitation. Commander Hayes was to receive a commendation at Naval Station Norfolk, and his involvement in her detention had earned him clearance to attend. He read the words twice. Still reeling, 6 months later, he found himself driving up to the gates of Norfolk, passing through multiple security checkpoints. The old detective from a tiny coastal department now stood among fewer than 50 guests in a small auditorium tucked away from the public eye. Most were high-ranking officers and civilian personnel with that unmistakable military bearing. Admiral Wilson took the podium without fanfare. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor Commander Alexandra Hayes for her extraordinary service during Operation Silent Harbor." The Admiral paused, acknowledging the gravity of the room. For security reasons, much remains classified, but Commander Hayes spent 11 months undercover, identifying and neutralizing a coordinated threat to our eastern seaboard ports. Applause was muted but genuine. When Commander Hayes stepped forward, her uniform gleamed with ribbons and commendations. Detective Wells hardly recognized the unremarkable woman he'd booked in handcuffs. Now she stood tall, composure flawless, every inch the epitome of naval professionalism. Afterward, Wells approached her, careful not to startle the woman who once refused to speak. "Commander Hayes, congratulations." She offered a small nod. "Thank you, Detective Wells." He cleared his throat. "I still can't believe it was necessary for you to be detained." Her calm eyes met his. "Operational security. If I'd revealed my identity, 13 months of deep cover would have unraveled. Sometimes you have to let procedure run its course. He considered that. I suppose you knew Admiral Wilson would intervene. I did, but if I'd asked, it would have compromised the appearance of a genuine local arrest. She paused and added, You did exactly what you should have. A small wave of pride washed over him. Even in that moment of revelation, she recognized his role. Weeks later, Wells settled into his new position as a liaison for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. His first assignment: develop protocols enabling civilian law enforcement to recognize and respect undercover military operators. He learned firsthand how easily the gears of justice and security could grind against each other. Months passed. Wells watched from afar as Commander Hayes faded back into anonymity, her mission concealed by classified silence. Then, one rainy evening, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed unknown. He answered, Detective Wells. Detective, Admiral Wilson's voice crackled. We've got a situation near Coastal Harbor. Unusual activity at a private range. Wells straightened. On it, sir. The next morning, he drove back down the familiar Tulane Road to that remote range in Maine. Frank Holden greeted him with that same steady nod. Good to see you again. Wells grinned. Feels strange being on your turf. Frank laughed. Your turf is wherever national security calls. Inside, the range had transformed. Unmarked SUVs and a communications van disguised as a cable company rig filled the parking lot. Dozens of operatives, quiet, efficient, blending perfectly, set up makeshift command posts. At 0900, Wells joined them for the briefing. Commander Hayes stood at the front, maps spread across folding tables. Intelligence indicates a domestic threat operating within 50 miles. We have 3 probable locations, 2 residential areas, and a commercial district. We need to pinpoint their base without alerting them. Wells studied the color-coded pins. Raid teams can't just storm in. She shook her head. No, we need to deploy surveillance, physical and electronic, and coordinate with local law enforcement as cover. Over the next 48 hours, Wells coordinated with county sheriffs, spinning cover stories, wildlife surveys, extended training exercises, equipment tests. The local cops, briefed on a need-to-know basis, merrily waved Navy vehicles through. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Hayes' team tapped into communications, monitored movements, and walked civilian streets, invisible and unobtrusive. Frank glanced at a handheld scope. These people move differently, he whispered to Wells. More controlled, minimal chatter, like ghosts. Wells nodded, recalling his first encounter. They're not soldiers or cops. They're something else. Late on day 2, a breakthrough. An electronic intercept pinpointed coded chatter in an abandoned waterfront warehouse owned by a shell corporation. Thermal imaging revealed 8 individuals moving crates, lumps that looked like weapons stashed on pallets. This is it, an analyst said. Commander Hayes peered at the feeds. We have probable cause for a warrant, but that pulls us into a purely law enforcement action. Wells exhaled. I'll arrange the warrant. We can brief the local tactical team. Minimum details. Foreign trained operatives, potential domestic threat. Exactly, Hayes confirmed. Nothing about us. Under Wells's guidance, a local SWAT team swept in just before dawn, supported by federal agents. Commander Hayes' Overwatch team station on rooftops provided real-time intel. The raid unfolded smoothly. 8 arrests, a haul of illegal arms, and digital evidence that would occupy analysts for months. By midday, the official statement hit the wires. A joint federal-local operation thwarted a domestic terror plot. No mention of military personnel, no nod to clandestine units. Wells met Frank at the booth later that afternoon. Thanks for everything. Frank shrugged. The news says I did nothing. Exactly how it should be. Wells smiled. That's national security. Commander Hayes appeared as the vehicles disgorged. She stepped up to Frank. Thank you for your discretion. Frank handed her the secured case he retrieved earlier. Glad to help. She paused. This range, it's more than just a training ground. He quirked an eyebrow. You could say that. She passed him a plain card embossed with a Naval Special Warfare insignia and a phone number. If you spot talent or unusual activity, call here. Frank tucked it into his wallet. Recruiting? Always, Hayes replied with a faint smile. Then she was gone, leaving behind the hum of returning normalcy. 6 months later, Frank noticed another expert shooter, a young woman in her early 20s. She moved with professional precision, compensating for crosswinds without instruments, meticulously recording each shot. Frank approached when she packed up. That was impressive. She nodded. Thank you. College team, he asked. Plausible cover, she replied. He smiled. Welcome anytime. Though if you really want to blend in, you might miss 1 in 10. She laughed once, sharply, revealing a spark of realness. Good to know. After she left, Frank examined the card in his pocket and dialed the number. A neutral voice answered. Identification. Blue water, still horizon, he said. Go ahead, came the reply. I met a young woman. Early 20s, professional marksmanship. Cover story about college teams, but operational movements. Should we assess? A pause. Understood. We'll look into it. Thank you for your report. Frank nodded to the empty range. Then he leaned in. One more question. Is Commander Hayes still working this area? Another pause, longer this time. That is not in current files. Frank smiled. Just curious. Your contribution is noted. Frank closed his eyes. Always happy to help. 3 days later, the young shooter returned with a middle-aged man exuding authority. They practiced together, the woman guiding his shots with precise, coaching cues. When they finished, the man introduced himself as Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Holden? Frank nodded. That'd be me. You made a report recently? I did. The man smiled. Good eyes. She's an evaluation, an assessment candidate. We send people here to see who notices. Frank folded his arms. I notice. You'll receive formal thanks soon, Sullivan said, handing over another card. This one bearing a more ornate insignia. We value observers like you. Frank tucked the new card beside the first. As they departed, he watched them go, thinking back to Commander Hayes' words. Some of us are always around. That evening, after closing, Frank found a package on his desk, a high-end thermal spotting scope and an encrypted comms module. A note read simply, Keep watching, Frank. He placed the scope atop the booth ledge and gazed out at the empty lanes. The range was no longer just a business. It was a waypoint in a covert network, a nexus for those who serve in shadows. In his mind, he replayed the arc of his journey, from handcuffing a silent stranger joining forces in life-and-death operations, to now supporting the next generation of specialized operatives. Some serve under medals and public acclaim. Others operate unseen, sacrifices unknown. And some, like Frank, keep watch at the margins, ensuring the shadows remain safe havens for necessary work. Tomorrow, a new stranger might walk in, unremarkable and silent, carrying a simple case. But Frank would know, some things never change, and some people you just don't see unless you know how to look. Days turned into weeks, and Frank settled into his dual roles, managing the shooting range by day and quietly supporting an invisible network by night. The thermal scope hummed softly, casting an orange glow across his booth each evening as he reviewed footage and communicated through the encrypted module. He never knew exactly when the next operative would appear, but he trusted his instincts and the subtle training Hayes had sparked in him. One overcast morning, Frank arrived before dawn. A single car was parked near the entrance, a beat-up sedan, nothing that screamed special operations. He grabbed his coffee and walked the lanes. There, leaning against a post, stood a man in his early 40s with a weathered face and calm eyes. He held a pistol casually, as if it were a wallet. Range is open in 15, Frank said. The man nodded. Thanks. Frank watched as he set up a single target. No grouping, no routine, just one paper silhouette at 50 yards. The man drew with fluid speed, fired 3 shots in rapid succession, and hit 3 thoracic strikes within a single inch. Frank raised an eyebrow. He'd seen fast draws before, but this was silent precision, almost artistic. The man packed up quickly and approached the booth. "Name's Carter," he said, nodding. "I'll need to use the indoor lanes today, getting the sights zeroed on a different system." "Sure," Frank replied, handing the key. Lane 3's open. Carter paused. "I'm not local." Frank slid a glance at him. "Traveling for work?" "Something like that." Carter said, voice low, "Just need to run a few tests." Frank watched him head inside. Something about Carter's gait, the slight lean, the way he held his shoulders, felt familiar, but he couldn't place it. He shrugged and returned to organizing targets. By midday, Carter returned, sweaty but satisfied. "Everything's on," he said, beaming. "Thanks for the help." Frank nodded, glad to hear it. Carter hesitated, then added, "You ever get that feeling you're part of something bigger but can't see it?" Frank considered. "Every day." Carter smiled, folded a business card, and handed it to Frank. No logo, just an embossed anchor with cross rifles. "You might want to keep an eye on Lane 3 next week." Then he jogged off toward his car. Frank examined the card. His pulse quickened as he recognized the symbol of Naval Special Warfare. He tucked it beside the others. That afternoon, Frank called Wells with a simple message. Lane 3. No further explanation. Within 48 hours, the range filled again with black SUVs and nondescript vans. Agents carried crates of surveillance gear and cameras. Wells arrived, fresh from briefing local sheriffs. He found Frank in the booth, the 3 cards lined up on the counter. "You've got a collector set," Wells said, picking up Hayes' card, then Sullivan's, and finally Carter's. Frank smiled. "Seems like every layer brings another." Wells nodded. "Last I checked, Commander Hayes appreciated your discretion." Frank leaned back. "I suppose it's time I asked for something in return." That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Wells and Frank walked the perimeter. The thermal scope glowed as Wells peered into the woods, mapping out approaches. "I've been thinking," Frank said, "you guys have training courses and assessments, but this place is perfect for testing real-world reactions. You should formalize something, call it observer training." Wells looked at him thoughtfully. "That's not a bad idea. Having trained range officers who can spot operatives, protect them, and feed intel could fill a critical gap." Frank nodded. "I know these woods, this range. I've seen people you'd never find on paper." Over the next month, Wells worked with NCIS and Naval Special Warfare to draft a pilot program. The Coastal Harbor Range would be the inaugural site for Guardian Observer Training. Frank would teach modules, reading body language, identifying operational movements, evaluating equipment anomalies, and using the encrypted comms protocol. On a crisp morning, Frank stood before a small group of range officers and local deputies. Wells introduced him. "Meet our first Guardian observer." Applause was polite, but curious. Frank cleared his throat. "Thank you. Today, we're going beyond safety rules and marksmanship. We're learning to see through the ordinary, to spot those who serve in shadows so they can operate safely." He clicked a laser pointer at the first slide, breath control, and shot rhythm. Over the next 2 hours, he demonstrated Hayes' 4-count inhale, smooth hold, controlled exhale. He showed video of Carter's draw, pointing out subtle cues. He described the scar pattern from helicopter rappelling. He taught them the authentication phrase, "Blue water, still horizon." By the end, the room hummed with newfound respect. Weeks later, Wells returned. "Frank, how's the program?" Frank smiled. "We've certified 10 observers from across the Northeast. They're integrated into range staffing rotations and local SWAT support." "That's incredible," Wells said. "You've changed how we operate." Frank nodded. "Feels good to contribute, you know?" One rainy afternoon, Frank closed the range early after storm warnings. He headed to his office to log daily reports. The encrypted module chirped. Incoming message, authentication passed. The screen displayed a single line, "Well done, Guardian." Frank stared at it, pride and humility intertwining. He typed back, watching. Somewhere in the world, Commander Hayes and the others received his message. They continued their missions, knowing that a quiet shooting range operator stood sentinel for them in the shadows. Months later, the Guardian Observer program expanded to 10 ranges along the eastern seaboard. Local law enforcement saw fewer inadvertent detentions of operatives. Undercover missions ran smoother, and national security operations faced fewer hiccups. But for Frank, it never got old. Each morning, he walked to the booth, switched on the thermoscope, and sipped his coffee as dawn mist swirled around the targets. He'd watch shooters of every kind, competitive, recreational, casual, and through the lens, he'd see something more. A flicker of training, a breath held, a stance too perfect. He'd note it, jot coordinates in his encrypted logs, and pass it along. Because some people serve under medals and headlines, some serve in shadows, and some, like Frank, serve by keeping watch, ensuring the shadows remain safe havens for those who protect us all. As the sun rose over coastal Maine, Frank replaced the blank targets. He paused, looking toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, they were always around. You just had to know where to look. And Frank did.